Welcome to the RJLT Economics. Today I want to essentially make the point that France needs reform, but that France is unreformable. And I want to develop today's podcast in 3 steps. First, I'll talk about the protest that has been going on in France for the better part of this month. And then I want to talk about why I believe that despite the grievances, France really needs a reform, and perhaps one that is more drastic than the one that Macron is trying to push through. And finally, I want to say that France cannot reform, and this cannot have a real solution without really knocking everything down for full rebuild. So first, let's talk about the protest. We know, of course, that the protest ostensibly is against the initiative, or perhaps the proposal, and later on the decree of Macron to raise the retirement age, right, the pension age. But we know that this actually goes quite a bit deeper than that. We know that people have been protesting in France for their stagnant economy, essentially, because stagnant wages, falling, perhaps stagnant, but in many cases falling living standards, those are a reflection of a stagnating economy. And now, coupled with inflation, it is unsurprising that people are angry. And at this crucial point, perhaps one that a drastic, I would say, quote unquote, drastic policy change, especially that in retirement, it's hardly easy to push through. But Macron still did it. People have been speculating why he has chosen this time to do it. I think it's very simple. I've heard people say that it must be because Macron wants to show his capability to his friends in Brussels. With all due respect, I think that is thinking too much. Macron is trying to push this through now because he won an election last year. He did not want to do this before his re-election, and now that he's been re-elected president of France for a full term, he has a lot of years ahead of him. I think he thinks that now his position is very secure, and perhaps, yes, not very solid because he doesn't have a majority in the parliament, but that is a side comment, right? That's a side remark. The key is that he is president now, and he has several years to recover from any repercussion of this, and then he can continue. He can run for election, or perhaps he can go to a higher office. Everything is possible for him, and for now, his position is so secure that he does what he wants, and that is what this is. But is what he wants also what France needs? Well, I think France needs more than what Macron is trying to do. And I agree. A lot of people say at this point that Macron is primarily serving the interests of the elite. True. But in this particular case, perhaps it is not that France is serving the interests of France, but that the interests of France and the interests of French elites coincide. And that is to make the French economy more viable in the mid to long term. And this leads us to the second part, which is that I want to make the Maybe I cannot really make the point, but I want to say that France needs reform. France needs to reform. It has a bureaucratic system that is exceptionally wasteful. Exceptionally wasteful. France has one of the highest tax burdens in across the world, and its government expenditure in proportion to GDP, I think, is the highest. And the number of I think what is a fonctionnaire, right? So these bureaucrats in the French workforce. I think this percentage is one of the highest, if not the highest. And so that is one area that needs to be reformed. And then there is this pension, the social security situation. I read somewhere, perhaps this is not exact, but it's a data point, it's the statistic, that in 1970, when in 1970 in France, the retirement age was 67 and the life expectancy for men was 68. I don't know if 68 really was only 68, but now it's certainly much higher. And at the same time, people's retirement age is also 5 years earlier. So people are taking out from Social Security for much longer, while at the same time, there are the number of people that have retired in proportion to people who are working. That is, people who are still paying Social Security. This percentage has dramatically increased, and even though France, like many Western countries, have tried to attract immigrants in order to solve this problem. Essentially, this is a Ponzi scheme, right? You always need more people going in to pay in order for the fewer people who paid in before to be able to take out. It's a Ponzi scheme, and that is, I believe, the fundamental nature of Social Security anywhere. The only way to make this work is to make sure that the retirement age and the life expectancy, you need to tune this, you need to fine-tune this so that there is a balance. Now, of course, you could also make the Social Security funds, as I have mentioned in one of my earlier podcasts, perhaps just 2 before this one, maybe 2 or 3 before this one. You can also make it viable by making it possible for Social Security to actually create yield, right, to make money. But this, following the monetary policy of the ECB and the European Union for the last 2 decades, this was not possible. So essentially, that actually is what has created all the problems in the Western financial system, especially the European one. But that's a digression. So Social Security is another issue. But beyond that, there's a problem with the unions. Too much collective bargaining. They are too powerful. Of course, I sympathize a lot with people on the left, and I like to think myself somewhat left-leaning, but at the same time, I'm also conservative fiscally, because I think people who are liberal fiscally work against the interest of the working class. Now, of course, let me explain this. Right? People who want to print money and spend, actually, they spend a little on the working class, they spend a lot on the rich. And the cost of this money printing is borne by people who need to earn wages. So essentially, as I have repeatedly said, the rich care about inflation less than the poor. Right? The poor really feel the pain. But at the same time, when you create too liberal a fiscal policy, you are you're creating inflation, and those people, as I said, spend little on the poor and keep a lot themselves and spend a lot on people who are rich. It's all a facade. So that's why economically I strongly disagree with those liberals. So there's that. I think there are many other issues. There's a problem with innovation as well, because France has as much of Europe has this system of that basically people don't. Yes, young people have a lot of creativity in France. That is somewhat quite different than the situation in, say, China. But the system is not encouraging innovation enough. Of course, the French government has all these initiatives. It's giving out loans. It's providing some direct capital injections. But the requirement always is for some technology to be already proven on the market. And this is not always easy. A lot of times, true creativity and true innovation requires a lot of investment before it can be tested by the market. Let's just talk about the internet. Actually, let's not talk about that because that would be a digression. But an example would be the internet. It took the U.S. government, I don't know how many billions, if not trillions of dollars invested over decades for there to be an internet. And now it has dramatically changed how we interact, how we work. And essentially everything has been changed by that. 2 decades of investment without a cent in reward. And that kind of commitment to innovation is missing in Europe, missing in France. So that's all those things. I say that France really needs reform, deep structural reform. That is not forthcoming. So now let's move on to the last part of today's discussion, or not really discussion because I'm talking here alone, but podcast. I think that France cannot reform. France suffers from 2 big things, right? Number one, I think it's bureaucracy. I think obviously we know that the French invented bureaucracy so that nothing gets done, and now they have bureaucracy extremely deeply rooted in the administration and in the society and in the minds of the people, so that very few things gets done, and the bureaucracy itself is self-sustaining, self-perpetuating. It's fundamentally against change, it's fundamentally against reform. And at the same time, and second thing, and a lot of people will disagree with me at this point, but I think is a style of democracy. Because for whatever reason, I think it's actually perhaps human nature, or inertia in the human mind, that a lot of people don't want to change. They want to feel secure, right? We can also talk about risk aversion. If you know about game theory or decision theory, risk aversion is a thing, right? So even if 2 choices have the same risk-adjusted expectancy in expected utility, just because one has a different risk curve, it may tilt people because of risk aversion, right? You want to play something on the safe thing because you don't want the benefit that you get from a big win cannot offset the possibility that you get a big loss. Right, it's more painful to lose than it is to gain something of the same value. Essentially, that is what it is. And because of risk aversion, people are have this inertia. They don't want to change. And in a democracy such as we find in Europe, people don't want to change. They want to hang on to a past that is no longer the condition under which a prospered no longer exists. Right? France did exceptionally well in the 19th century, early 20th century, save for the 3 wars that it fought and lost to Germany. But that mostly was thanks to, not exclusively so, but I know the French people probably wouldn't much agree with me, but to a large extent thanks to its colonial structure. It was extracting resources and labor from Africa primarily, essentially for free. And it was robbing the wealth of the Africans. That was, I don't know what the proportion was, but 5-1, 10-1, perhaps even higher. 10, 20, maybe 5, 10 Africans working essentially to provide to support the lifestyle of one Frenchman or French woman. In that way, obviously, you can have a higher standard of living, right? And then I know that after the war, World War II, there was a period of decolonization. By that point, France had already accumulated its capital. It has already a technological advantage. So with the capital that it has kept from its colonial days, with the technical know-how that it has gained over the years, I don't want to take away the credits that the French earned themselves. So they were able to sustain good recovery. They were able to experience good recovery, right? The Trente Glorieuses or something like that. But afterwards, there was a continuous slowdown in the economy as the world suffered from this the oil shock, and later we see the new world order actually formed in the 80s. In the 80s, at that point, France already was beginning to suffer from a stagnation. Stagnation first starting in their industries, and later on permeated throughout the French economy. So people are resistant to change. So I think this is going to be very difficult for anything to happen. What will happen eventually is for things to get very, very bad. And when it gets so bad, people will burn down the house for a rebuild. And when this happens, obviously in the immediate term, the interests of everyone will be touched, and a lot of people, including those who have retired, will be worse off, and a lot of people who have been protesting and who will have been fighting for that change, their interests will be undermined as well. But it is something that is necessary, right? That will be revolution. At some time, I'm not suggesting, absolutely not suggesting, I'm certainly not fanning anyone to participate in this type of thing, right? Absolutely not. Don't do it. But that is the only way for France, in my opinion, to reform. All right. That's all I have to say today. Thank you very much for listening, especially if you have listened to this point. All right. And visit my website, drglt.com. Have a great day.